to the PowerCat Game Day Sunday review. K-State drops a heartbreaker to the Oklahoma State Cowboys 20-18 in a game where, especially for like the last 8 minutes, you want to talk about some stress-induced fan base, just joy followed by rage, followed by what just happened. The end of that game was insane. K-State hangs in one where, of course, Cowboys strongly favored to win. It's a good defensive performance, but John, bigger case for you in this one. Was it the end of the game, or was it the missed opportunities in the first quarter that came back more to haunt K-State?
I mean, that's a tough decision because they're both very, very important. I think, to me, it's hard to pin it more on the early game thing when you have such a blatant, obvious play that went the wrong way, right? The Will Howard fumble that turns into a scoop and score. That's just too hard for me to ignore. You're driving to go ahead. You kick a field goal, you're at least going to be up by one. You score a touchdown, you're going to be up by or forcing Oklahoma State to go and punch it in the end zone on the other end. And that's just one of those plays, man. Will Howard's a true freshman quarterback. You're going to have to live with some of those mistakes. I think we felt like for a couple of weeks there when he came in against Texas Tech and TCU and Kansas, you're like waiting for this to happen. Unfortunately, it's now happened in back-to-back weeks where, he looked like a true freshman against West Virginia, and he certainly did against Oklahoma State. And I think in hindsight, it's just easy to say, hey, the competition level stepped up. And they played two better defenses, and all of a sudden, Will Howard just looks way more raw. Whereas he was able to be more of a game manager before. K-State needed him to go make some plays with no Briley Moore and some of the offensive weapons, really hurting. Malik Knowles going out in the game, and he just wasn't able to do it. It's tough. Like, you hate it because you hear how much of a competitor he is from everybody, and he does seem to have the right attitude and, be a kid that has his head screwed on straight and ready to go. But that's just a mistake that to me is too hard to ignore in answering that specific question. Now, at the same time, 2 weeks in a row, early in the game, you get in the red zone and you can't punch it in. And I mean, the first half, K-State did absolutely dominate, and it's 6-0 there for a while. I remember looking up and thinking, like, God, it's 6-0, and it feels like K-State has just wiped the floor with Oklahoma State. And if you give a team like Oklahoma State a chance to hang around like that, you are playing with fire and not setting yourself up for any kind of margin for error if you do have a play like what happened with Will.
Yeah, it was hard to feel good even up 12-0 at halftime. And the reason being is you've completely dominated that game. And yet you knew Oklahoma State was just one explosive play away from, being down 5. I mean, that's all it took. You were grinding out first downs and working so hard just to get points. And all it took was one busted run by LD Brown to get them down in the red zone. And then it's a 12-10 football game. And then you kind of felt it slipping away at that point because K-State's defense, you felt like was going to have to be perfect with the limitations of the offense. My frustration is you do go into the halftime up 12-0, and then you do absolutely nothing in the third quarter. K-State continues to come out and start slow in the third quarter of games. They've done it 5 out of the 7 games this year. And those 5 games, they've combined for 3 points in the third quarter. It just sucks the momentum out of your football team. The first 3 drives of the third quarter, they didn't get a first down. They went 3 and out. In 7 of their 13 drives in the game, they didn't get a first down. You just can't continue to put the defense back out on the field and expect them to be flawless. They played great, and obviously Oklahoma State had their own limitations, and K-State caught them at about the best time you could without Tylan Wallace, who's arguably the best receiver in the Big 12, as well as Chuba Hubbard going down with an injury in the third quarter, not coming back. LD Brown was clearly banged up, their number 2 running back, and their offensive line was beat up, and their offensive line wasn't very good to begin with. And so K-State had opportunities, and that's just what stinks about this one is it's really painful to let a game like that slip away that you felt like you'd won. And if you're Oklahoma State, I guess things even out. We talked last week how that Texas game was stupid. They outgained Texas by 250 plus yards. Clearly should have won that game, but turnovers cost them. It felt the same for K-State. The shoe was on the other foot this week. K-State outgains them 370 to 256. I mean, you hold Oklahoma State 256 yards of offense, you got to win the game, and 108 yards passing, 3.7 yards per carry. The defense was great. But it's the story of it is turnovers. And we knew this was the issue for K-State football to be good in the Chris Kleiman era. They play good defense and they take care of the football and win the turnover battle. And in the last 2 weeks, the story has been with a true freshman quarterback, they're losing the turnover battle in a bad way. You know, it's essentially 5-0 in turnovers right now over the last 2 games. 2 of those turnovers went directly for touchdowns for the opponent. And so the inability to take care of the football and start losing the turnover battle once you lost your experienced quarterback in Skylar Thompson, that's the story to me. You're just dealing with the ups and downs of a true freshman QB.
Well, I think so. And, you know, it's interesting with Will in there. Obviously, you kind of knew that at some point, as John mentioned, that this was going to be back and forth. I think I likened it a little bit to watching someone learn how to drive stick shift every once in a while, where you're doing really well and then you just something kills it, right? And late in that game, he's under a pressure situation, and you know the fumble's you don't want to lose the fumble. It's a fluke that it pops right into a linebacker's hands and goes for a touchdown. But then also, you know, that a great drive to get it within 2, and then not a great play there on the 2-point conversion, and then the interception at the very end after your defense holds and gets the ball back. So you can kind of, depending on what you want to look at, John, I suppose if you want to be negative, you can spin it negative, but I mean, he did some things and there were some drives. There's been bright spots for him, even in these 2 losses. It's just, I think that fans just have to remember that he's really young and you just kind of have to hold on for a little bit, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's really how I see it. I don't think it's fair to make real sweeping judgments about what Will Howard is as a quarterback yet at this point in his career, because this is not boy, I would put Cole on the spot on PowerCat game day trying to pronounce DJ's last name at Clemson. I'm not even going to try at this point, but it's not that kid who was the number 1 recruit in the country that's coming in as a true freshman, like ready to go. Will Howard was more of a developmental sort of a quarterback, and like maybe fans don't want to hear it, but I still think he does have a lot of potential. He's just, those are guys that are raw and take some time to grow and develop. I mean, I think even with the pedigree of Jake Rubley, who's coming in next year, you would expect more of an instant impact than what you have with Will. So he's, again, I've said it before and I'll say it again, like you can tell just in talking to him, he's really sharp. He's got a great demeanor to be a quarterback. He's got a lot of things really working for him that I think will make him successful. But yeah, right now, that's just life with a true freshman quarterback. And I think some of it is K-State fans got lulled to sleep a little bit by how easy things seemed to be for that 4-game win streak there, where he came in and nothing really went totally off the rails. Now you're starting to deal with some teams that can make him do that. And I think that's just indicative of the whole game. Like, you could look at it multiple different ways. I think it's absolutely fair to say, like Cole kind of mentioned, Oklahoma State was beat up. Spencer Sanders was definitely beat up. Chuba Hubbard was beat up. They didn't have Tylan Wallace outside of the onside kick when he came on for the hands team. That's probably a game you should win, especially the way that you started and dominated in the first half. But at the same time, K-State's offense still, they don't, I mean, Deuce was healthy and looked better, but they just don't have much. I mean, Briley Moore is not there to be a guy in the red zone to look to capitalize on some of those drives. Malik Knowles, again, it just seems like Chris Kleiman is frustrated every time he gets asked about it post-game because Malik's leaving the game, whether it's an injury or whatever it is. And at this point, it's just you kind of throw up your hands and you're like, I don't know what's going on there, but he's not somebody that's consistently out. So then you didn't have him, and you just, every time you look at the receivers that are out there, nothing against those guys, man, but sometimes you just cringe when you look at who they're lining up at receiver. And based on all of that, they still, against a high-powered elite offense, at least as far as the league is concerned, gave themselves a real chance to win that game when they were 12.5-point underdogs, like basically 2 touchdown underdogs by the time the game kicked off. I think it had moved up to 14. So it's hard for me to come down and say, hey, the coaching really was terrible and this is an awful loss, even though it's one of the most frustrating losses K-State has had in a long time based on circumstance.
Yeah, John, we talked about a lack of weapons, and obviously once Malik Knowles went down once again, you look out there in the last couple drives of the game, they had Keenan Garber on the field, who's a redshirt freshman who really hasn't played yet in his career. DJ Render, who was a safety last year, moved to receiver. Connor Fox, a redshirt freshman at tight end who hadn't played really at all yet because Sammy Wheeler had went down, and Sammy Wheeler was a quarterback 3 years ago that moved to tight end. And now Sammy Wheeler is probably one of your best weapons on offense because they're so limited, and then they've got Seth Porter on the field, who's a former walk-on as well at receiver. That just kind of illustrates the lack of weapons that they had, which is what really surprises me that they were able to run the football as effectively as they did, because Oklahoma State was a really good defense coming into that game. They were only giving up 3.4 yards per carry on the year. And K-State obviously had been struggling to run the football, and yet they run for 227 yards and average over 5 yards per carry and really excelled in the quarterback run game, when Oklahoma State probably knew that's really K-State's only shot to win, is if they could successfully run the football. And they did. And so it's frustrating to let it get away. But yeah, lack of weapons. Obviously we talked about the fumble. It's kind of a fluke play. It stings because it looked like he had the first down. They've got a chance there to drive down, get a touchdown, go for 2, and have a 7-point lead with about 5 minutes left in that game, or at worst, kick a field goal and be up 2 and try to put the game in the hands of your defense that dominated. Then the defense gets that last stop and gives you one more shot. And, a minute 54, K-State had the ball back at the 25-yard line, which is an eternity. And Oklahoma State gave K-State the wind in the fourth quarter of that game. And the wind was that was a big deal. I mean, K-State had a good 15-mile-per-hour gust at their backs. We've seen Blake Lynch make a 52-yard field goal this year with no wind at his back at all. I mean, K-State probably only needed 35 to 40 yards to be able to attempt a field goal with a minute 54 left. Doesn't matter they didn't have any timeouts. They had plenty of time. They could have just checked it down and gotten into field goal range with an opportunity to win that game. And, Will Howard, I thought, really forced it there. That's the makings of a true freshman. He forced it downfield, tried to get way too much at first. Shabastin Taylor was wide open on a simple crossing route at about the 30-yard line. If he just dumps it down to him, he probably gets 10 to 15 yards, gets out of bounds, in case it's sitting at the 40-yard line, only needing 25 yards for a field goal. But that's what happens when you have a true freshman quarterback out there. And, I hope that a lot of the fan base now recognizes that what K-State had in Skylar Thompson, and the hypocrisy that some of the fan base had when, Skylar Thompson struggled a little bit against Arkansas State, and there were people clamoring for Will Howard to come in and play quarterback. You can't replace a fifth-year experienced quality starting quarterback with a true freshman and expect things to be great. It's obviously going to be a downgrade unless you're talking about a Trevor Lawrence type that you have as your freshman quarterback. And this isn't a knock on Will Howard. It's a bit ridiculous to me that so many people wanted to see Will Howard over Skylar Thompson as a true freshman. And that's what stings, because if Skylar Thompson, we talk about the limitations of this offense and the lack of explosive players at the skill positions. And yet if Skylar Thompson was the quarterback, I feel like this team has one loss in the Big 12 at worst right now and is very likely to play in the Big 12 championship. And again, I want to make it clear, it's not a knock on Will Howard. It's just the makings of having a true freshman quarterback playing in a pandemic that didn't even get spring football versus a fifth-year experienced quarterback, and this is a game that you feel like your fifth-year experienced quarterback probably wins.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. And I mean, we've talked about it throughout the season this year too, that practice scenarios have been different every single week. You're dealing with a different group of guys every time you roll it out there to try to even practice, not even on week to week, almost day to day, it seems like, and that's not just K-State, that's everywhere, which makes it a little more difficult. So because of the way that the schedule falls, obviously you get the bye next week. If anything, seems like that's a good thing for K-State with the final 3 coming up. You get Iowa State, Baylor, Texas. Iowa State's going to be tough, although they struggled a little bit yesterday against Baylor. This final 3, I mean, Cole said last week, you feel like you had to split somewhere between Oklahoma State and Iowa State to have a chance moving towards the end of the year. Is this just a chance to get healthy, reset, extra week of practice? I mean, it seems like yet again the bye week is kind of good timing for the Cats.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting home stretch of the season, because I think they could very easily win every single game left on their schedule. They could very easily lose every single game left on their schedule. I mean, Baylor definitely showed me more than what I thought they had against Iowa State, and that game is on the road. Texas, I think, is definitely beatable. I mean, you look at compare the games that both teams played against Oklahoma State, you can definitely make a case K-State wins that game. And Texas coming to Manhattan in December in the cold, if their season is not what they want it to be at that point, like not in the running for a Big 12 championship anymore, that becomes, I think, much more winnable. And then obviously Iowa State, I mean, Brock Purdy has not been what everybody expected him to be this year. He had some real rough moments yesterday against Baylor. Breece Hall is great, but Iowa State, I think, is certainly far from infallible. And that's going to be a game that you could absolutely win coming off of a bye week. I think the important part of the bye week to me is just simply like, hey, let's get Briley Moore healthy. I mean, I think he's really, really important to the offense. I don't think the impact of him can be understated, not just in production, which before last week, you could argue he had been the most productive tight end in the league. He had been better than Charlie Kolar at Iowa State, who most people had as the first team All Big 12 tight end. Then the debate comes down to like Stogner at Oklahoma and whether or not Briley Moore is better and more effective than him. But it's just having the threat of him actually out there on the field that makes a big difference, I think, too, with the offense. So I don't think that can be understated. And the fact that you have a bye week and a chance to try and get him back and give Courtney Messingham and the offense just more weapons to work with, I think will make a huge difference. And I think the other solace that you can take out of all of it is just that this coaching staff did get the team again ready to compete with Oklahoma State, and they were in the game, unlike what happened at West Virginia. So they definitely took some steps forward. They're still trying to use duct tape and paper clips to work some of this and make it go. So I think they will still win at least one game the rest of the way. I think the question to me becomes, hey, can you get two? Can you get two of the last three and feel good about a 6-4 season? That would really be my expectation. I mean, obviously, I think they still do control their Big 12 championship destiny if they were to win out, based on what tiebreakers would be in those scenarios. But that's not what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, hey, get 2 of 3, finish 6-4, and feel like you had a nice season.
Yeah, you're right, John. If they did win out, they'd go to the Big 12 championship. So they do control their own destiny. I think it's like you said, it's a lot to ask for this team with the limitations they have offensively to expect them to win all 3 of those games. They're potentially going to be underdogs in 2 of them against Texas and Iowa State. We'll see where Texas is at the end of the year. But, what hurts about yesterday, obviously, is if you had won that game with the tiebreaker setups, you only had to go 2-1 down the stretch, and you're automatically guaranteed to play in the Big 12 title at that game because K-State would have owned the tiebreakers. The setup, it didn't even matter who K-State would have beaten in those last 3 games. They could have lost to Iowa State, beat Baylor, and beat Texas, gotten in, or vice versa. And so now you've taken out any margin for error that you did have by losing yesterday's game. It would have felt great going into a bye week, being 5-1 in the Big 12, coming off a win against a top 15 team. So it obviously is going to be tough for the fans and the players to kind of swallow that and sit on it for 2 weeks. But to me, the importance, like John said, is just really getting some guys who are banged up back healthy. Obviously Briley Moore, you hope he can give it a go against Iowa State. Iowa State's got a solid defense, top 25 in points per drive allowed. And then obviously some other guys that looked banged up yesterday. And, who knows if Malik Knowles is ever going to stay healthy, but maybe you can get him back healthy for that game as well. And maybe he can show something. Justin Gardner, although K-State has plenty of depth in the secondary, he didn't play yesterday. He's been banged up, so you should get him back probably. And then the other part is really just, continue to work with Will Howard. You've got an extra week now to prep and prepare him and continue to develop him without an opponent looming next weekend. So you can spend some time with developmental stuff with Will Howard and hopefully get him better and get the offense improved.
I think the bye week comes at a great time. Just kind of looking around football this weekend, it's everybody got a chance to play, and that's the first time that we can say that for football. I know that you guys said that you were watching games last night. Was it nice to have a full docket of football? And obviously the big talk was going to be Notre Dame knocking off Clemson, short Trevor Lawrence, of course, who somehow is still in COVID protocol but on the sideline, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. But Notre Dame gets a big win. Ohio State looks like it's maybe Ohio State versus the world. Who were you most impressed with yesterday?
And well, I'll be honest. There was so much going on yesterday in the country that I was a little bit distracted from some of the football that was actually happening. But I would have to say Notre Dame. I certainly didn't expect them to go win that game even without Trevor Lawrence. I felt like Clemson's roster, the rest of what they have, the infrastructure of all that with ETN and company, like Notre Dame still would not have had a chance to hang with their athletes. So I would have to say Notre Dame. But it was nice to have a full slate. And Cole and I were talking about like watching Pac-12 after dark. It was nice to come home and be like, all right, so we still do have a crazy game going on out west. I guess it wasn't really that crazy between Washington State and Oregon State, but yeah, it felt nice to have all of that. You have some interesting storylines. The Big Ten, I think what you're finding out is some of these other leagues that started later, like the Big Ten, like you're going to have some real ups and downs, and you're going to have some weird things happening. And weird things happening are Michigan being 1-2, and Indiana being 3-0, and Penn State being 0-3. To me, a lot of that is still COVID related, and just how weird of an offseason it was, how weird of a season it's been, and everything going on. And I tried screaming that from the rooftops with the Big 12 early on that, hey, like, just chill out about the Sun Belt stuff. I don't think it's as big of an indictment on the league as everybody makes it out to be. I think it's just going to be a really weird year in college football. And I think you're seeing that play out in a number of spots across the country. And the Big Ten in particular, to me, stood out yesterday where it's like, okay, like maybe now everybody is getting a dose of reality here and can understand what's going on.
Yeah, how about Penn State losing to Maryland by 16 as 25, 26-point favorites yesterday? I mean, it wasn't even close. That just shows how crazy this season is, to your point, John, and the unpredictability of it week to week and where things are at. I was really impressed with Florida. I only got to watch a little bit of that game, but, as 3-point underdogs to really just manhandle Georgia. That was impressive to me. And, now Florida is probably the SEC's only other hope at getting a second team in the playoff, but they'll have to beat Alabama in the playoff, which, I don't think that'll probably happen.
Well, disrespecting Texas A&M?
Well, look, I mean, Texas A&M did. Texas A&M, I have to give Texas A&M credit because that was a 10-point spread yesterday. I thought South Carolina would probably actually cover that. South Carolina had been respectable going into that game and just got completely and thoroughly dominated. And, usually that's the type of game I expect A&M to struggle in, but they seem to be putting it together. So you're right. Texas A&M, I suppose, could, although they don't have the tiebreaker on Bama. So that's going to be their issue in getting into the SEC title. But yeah, it's just a crazy week of football. It's really nice to have the Pac-12 games back. It's really nice to have Maction back for my Wednesday nights, guys, to have entertainment during a weeknight as well. So there's more football. The more football, the better. And I do enjoy being able to lay in bed or sit downstairs and have a drink and watch football at midnight and watch some crazy ending potentially happening. It's not as fun when K-State doesn't win, though. I will tell you that. It's a lot more fun to kick back after you win an 11 a.m. game or something early in the day and know your team already won and just, laugh at Iowa State when they're losing to Baylor and you think you might have a chance to make fun of them next week all over social media, but unfortunately didn't have that opportunity. So, and K-State lost as well. So, but yeah, it's fun to have games back.
Well, you get a chance to grab a beverage today. The Chiefs get the returning Christian McCaffrey to the joy of fantasy football players everywhere who've been camping on him for the past 5 weeks after he's injured. It's an interesting game just because Carolina's kind of been a super up and down team. The Chiefs last week remembered that they had Patrick Mahomes at quarterback and decided to throw it all over the field and win a game. Expectations today for Chiefs Carolina.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of feels like just a bland spot in the schedule here for the Chiefs, and in general, this is where they kind of hit a lull as far as that is concerned, in some easier games. I mean, I know I've listened to Mitch Holthus on our show earlier this week talking about how much he loves Matt Rule and Carolina and thinks that they're better than their record, and I suppose there's probably some of that is true, but it's hard for me to get. I mean, I love watching the Chiefs every week. It's hard for me to get particularly fired up for a game against Carolina, but it is very important in the big picture. I mean, they can't look at it like that, obviously, because they're still chasing right now when it comes to the number one seed, which is so much more important this year in football now with the way the playoff structure is. And I hate it as a Chiefs fan. I do, because it's such a massive advantage to be number one and gives you no margin for error, like what happened last year with the Chiefs, and still being able to get a 2 seed and a bye, and it's such an advantage toward getting to the Super Bowl. So it's immensely important. I just, as a fan, the last 2 weeks haven't had me real fired up, especially because the Chiefs have played a couple of really big games so far this year. I mean, the Bills, the Ravens, they've had some really big matchups to get geeked up and excited about. It's hard for me to feign the same kind of excitement when you have Carolina coming up today.
I enjoy these types of games. I like to be able to sit back and relax a little bit more and not be stressed out at the end. And of course, I thought the same thing was going to happen with the Raiders earlier this year. And obviously we saw how that turned out. Teddy Bridgewater at quarterback, they've got decent receivers, but I don't think Carolina has a very good defense. So I think the Chiefs offense should really work in this game and score a lot of points. So not particularly nervous about the outcome of this game, but to John's point on another topic, it's incredibly frustrating what the NFL has done with the playoff format moving forward going into this year. I thought the NFL had a perfect playoff setup, 6 teams, each league. You've got the 2 wild card spots. You reward the top 2 teams with byes and a home game the next week. Really incentivizes and makes the regular season extra important. Now you got it down to one, just 1 seed getting a bye and making everybody else play. I don't get that. I know they want to add a playoff game, right? Because TV money to generate all of that extra revenue. But I just don't think you should punish the, potentially number 2 seed. The Chiefs could go 15-1 and be the 2 seed. Think how ridiculous that is. I mean, the Steelers could go unbeaten. And it's just silly to me that a 15-1 team could potentially have to play right off the bat week 1 and have to travel then eventually to play a 16-0 team. I don't know. It's frustrating that that's what's occurred. Now, I think the Steelers will lose a game, and I have no idea how the tiebreakers would work if both teams went 15-1 because the Chiefs lost to an AFC opponent. But we'll see. I don't think the Ravens are very good now. I shouldn't say very good. I don't think they're as good as everyone thought they were going to be. They're falling back a little bit. So I'm not sure who's going to beat the Steelers, but I'm sure someone will and make it a very interesting race. But the Chiefs, they can't afford to lose games like this. They might have to win out if they want the 1 seed.
Well, it's not going to be a real inspiring docket of games, so hope for a lot of points in that one because the lineup this weekend is a little light, we'll put it that way, for the NFL. I'm sure they thought that Steelers-Cowboys would be interesting at the beginning of the season. That game's going to stink. Really the only one you have to really look forward to is probably Saints-Buccaneers. But outside of that, it's not a real bright weekend of NFL football.
Just wait till we get to Thanksgiving, Corey, and we got the Cowboys and Washington football team playing in that 3:30 window. And the Lions, the Lions-Texans, the Lions and 1-6 Texans that day as well. Yeah. It's at least we get the Steelers-Ravens that night.
Yeah, it means more time for turkey, I think, more than anything. More time for turkey. All right, gentlemen. Well, enjoy your bye week as well. We'll catch up in 2 weeks. K-State, Iowa State, Farmageddon in a couple weeks. Look forward to it. You guys have a great weekend. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, sounds good.